I'd like to introduce the session on future cities and the internet, which is another dimension of discussing the role. Could we just close the door, please? Alex, or who's there, close the door if you're... Ollie, thank you, thank you. To this, thank you, afternoon session, it's another dimension on how digital is changing our realities, how it's changing cities, and not only the internet is changing cities. What is the future of cities altogether? We have a very international, respected, and knowledgeable panel here, and I'd like to let the moderator, Oleg Alexeev, the Vice President of the Skokol Foundation, to introduce the panel and this, the panelists now for the next time we speak about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's very good that we speak about the future cities. Today we are going to talk about the role of digital technologies, first of all, in development of the cities. I will not brainwash you about the challenges the cities face. Those who live in Moscow experience them in every moment, at every moment. Of course, it's very interesting to speak in some frames about the future of the cities. I mean, first of all, the technologies, the governments, and the communities. And I hope that all my colleagues, all the speakers of this panel, will focus on some of them, a problem or one of them. Okay, we'll start from Stefan Denig from Siemens. Yes, he has a short presentation, please. And after that, we'll speak Bill Hutchinson, and after that, Eric Schuldenfrei. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Can I see my charts up here, please, so everybody can see them? I see them already down there, so if you could... Okay, it's fine, good. Okay, so you can all... Oh yeah, okay, fine, I did see that thing. So yeah, good afternoon and welcome also from my side. Happy to be here. And I'm not just here in order to introduce the discussion. I would also want to invite you right away to continue the discussion about the future of cities that we have here today, later in the year. We are talking about a very big topic here today, the future of cities, and we all know the challenges are enormous. Cities already represent more than half of the world's population. They are growing at exponential pace. The UN would expect that by the middle of the century, around 70% of mankind would live in cities. So billions of people actually will move and will flow into cities over the decades to come. And if we want to accommodate all those people in cities, and if we want to create cities that have the infrastructure to be livable places for those citizens, a city or equivalent of an equivalent city of the size of London would need to be built every month over the next 40 years. And I think that is really good. I mean, that shows what the challenge is. We have to implement efficient infrastructure in cities while at the same time they are growing like crazy. And this is not just a livability challenge, it's also a challenge for the environmental performance of cities, as cities are also the major drivers of climate change. They are responsible for around 70% of all greenhouse gases that are emitted worldwide, and they consume around 2/3 of all energy that is being consumed on the globe worldwide. So on the one hand, we have to make those fast-growing cities livable places, but on the other hand, also places that will be environmentally viable places, and to preserve our environment, not just for the generation today, but also for the generation of the future. And Siemens is actually... How can I get to the next chart? Yeah, here we go. Siemens is taking this challenge very seriously, and we are right now building in London a major urban sustainability center, which will open later in the year prior to the Olympics, which actually will become a global hub for the discussion around sustainable cities in the future. This is what it will look like. It'll be in eastern London by the Eastern Docklands, right south of the Olympic Centre. It's a new building. The building in itself is quite an example of what technology and smart technology can do to make our cities and our buildings more energy efficient, smarter and environmentally friendly. It'll be a Platinum LEED certified building. It'll have photovoltaic panels and batteries and heat pumps and rainwater harvesting, etc. So anything what is available in terms of technology nowadays to make a building like that efficient. And it will have a major exhibition about urban sustainability, which will be open to the general public. So we are reaching out to the people out there, not just an expert community, but everybody can come and visit this exhibition, which will feature, examples for advanced environmental technologies, advanced policies in cities, how to build more sustainable cities in the future, and also examples of what each individual who lives in cities has to do and how he or she has to change his behavior to make life in cities more sustainable. So I already invite you to come whenever you are in London to see us out there in the Eastern Docklands after July. And we will actually, as part of the official grand opening of our center in September, we will have a DLD Cities Conference. So we will have a full day dedicated to discuss the issues that we can only discuss today in 45 minutes in London, and you're all happily invited to join us there. We're not just doing this, so we have a whole series of actually research partnerships and publications around what technologies can do to make our cities smarter and more environmentally viable. And I would, as an introduction to today's discussion, I would want to speak about two pieces of research that we've done and that highlight what technologies that are already available today can do to our cities and to the future of our cities. And I've chosen two examples of cities which are quite different. One is London and one is Yekaterinburg here in Russia, to show you a bit what technologies can do and also how economically viable it is to implement all those technologies today. What we did here in this piece of research, when we were looking at London, was we were looking at how much energy does London consume today, and how much CO2 emissions does London generate today in all the fields, in buildings, in transportation, in cars, in public transport, in light bulbs, in industry. So whatever is a consumer of energy and emitter of CO2 in London, we were actually looking at. We were extrapolating how much energy and CO2 London would emit or consume or emit by 2025. And then we were looking at what are the technologies that can help bring energy consumption and CO2 emissions down, and that are not yet implemented today. So we were identifying technological levers, around 200 actually, that we were looking at to make the city smarter and more energy efficient and bring CO2 emissions down. And we're looking at what the potential, the economic potential, and also the environmental impact of those technologies would be if they were all implemented in London. And as you can see here, we identified a huge potential through technology alone in terms of CO2 abatement. London could bring down its CO2 emissions by 44% by 2025 if all those technologies that we've identified in all those areas would be implemented. And that is without taking into account any innovation, any new technologies. That's only technologies that are available today. And that is without taking into account any behavioral change. This does not assume that people will do anything different from what they do today. And when you look at the targets that London has, those 44% can easily meet all Kyoto and EU and UK targets. London itself has a more efficient target. It wants to bring its CO2 emissions down by 60%, and technology alone can already do 44%. And if innovation and behavioral change comes on top, these targets look quite realistic. These are the major fields, where CO2 can be brought down. It's primarily in buildings. Around half of the potential is in buildings. It's also in transportation, making cars more efficient, making public transportation more efficient, and it is in energy by putting more efficient energy consumption in place, both on a central and decentral level. And that's the interesting chart, because this shows you actually not just it's a selection of some of the 200 technologies we've looked at, and we've looked at anything like from better buildings insulation, so very simple things, to very sophisticated technology like technologies to make buildings smarter, more automized, better regulated, smart grids that help steer through better intelligence and better insights into when and what time energy is being consumed, that makes grids more efficient and helps us consume energy at better times, avoiding peaks, etc. So from the very simple to the very sophisticated technologies, we've looked at the levers, and this shows you a selection of all the levers. It shows you how much energy, how much CO2 they can abate, but it also shows you what the economic impact would be, i.e. what kind of upfront, financial upfront investment we would have to make to implement those technologies, and what would the payback of that investment would be through energy savings that can be achieved over the life cycle. And all levers that you see here that are below the x-axis, all those levers, in all those cases, the upfront investment would pay back over the life cycle out of the energy savings achieved. And 2/3 of all those technologies that we've looked at that would contribute to energy savings and CO2 abatement in London would actually pay back their upfront investment over the years. So the great news here is it's not just that technologies are available on all levels of sophistication, it also is already a financially viable case to implement those technologies if you do not just look at the upfront investment, but if you look at the whole life cycle. The payment or the payback period, of course, differs. It ranges from just a couple of months to replace traditional convalescent light bulbs into energy efficient light bulbs, up to a couple of years when we talk about buildings automation or so on. But in most cases, in 2/3 of all cases, the technology implementation pays back. And this is another interesting chart. Who would have to do it in cities? Interestingly enough, only 3% of the overall CO2 abatement that can be achieved can be done by investments that the city itself would have to do. What the city can do is, for instance, putting buildings automation in place in public buildings that are owned by the cities, putting hybrid buses in place in public transportation, putting better traffic management systems in place. These are the things that would be direct investments by the city. But only 3% of the overall potential can be achieved by those investments. All the rest would need to be done primarily, as you can see in those red field of the chart, of the pie chart, the 48%. 48% would need to be done by actions that the citizens of London would need to go into. That would mean better insulating their houses, exchanging their light bulbs, using public transportation, etc., etc. So that is a call for action for each of us, and that is also a challenge when we speak about cities and the internet. I think a huge challenge to all of us to spread the news, to build communities in cities, to mobilize people, because the city alone cannot do it. It's all of us actually who have to do things here, and the social media and any kind of communities that we can build to generate awareness and help people or make it easier for people to change their behavior and implement new technologies in their home and in their daily lives is a major challenge here. Can you switch me back to the... Yeah. Okay, thanks. And just now, in the last minute, to show you what this could mean in a completely different city. That's the city of Yekaterinburg here in Russia. In Yekaterinburg, we've also looked at a completely different city. London being primarily a banking and service-oriented city. Yekaterinburg, a city that still has a lot of heavy industry, a lot of manufacturing, a lot of energy-intensive manufacturing. Completely different environment. Here again, we've looked at technological levers and smart and intelligent, efficient technologies to decrease energy consumption in Yekaterinburg. And as you can see here, the most common, the most easy to implement technologies would already lead to an energy saving potential of 44% in Yekaterinburg, and only 12 major technologies out of that would account for around half of all this savings potential. And if you go into more sophisticated and smarter technologies like smart grids that are not yet as ripe as others, this potential could even be brought up to 79% of energy savings. And the 44% alone represent 4 days, since energy which is being consumed in Yekaterinburg is primarily gas, so those potential of 44% already represent 4 days of Russia's exports in terms of gas. So there's a huge savings potential that would not only help Yekaterinburg, but that would also make more gas available for other purposes, for instance, to export it. So there was a couple of snapshots of the work we do, and I hope it'll help to kick off the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefan. Bill, please.
Well, thank you very much. We have had a fabulous day today so far. Tremendous things we've seen. I've seen a little sun lamp that's going to reduce kerosene use in Africa. I've seen zip cars, so I can just call on my mobile and say, hey, zip car, come and pick me up. I've seen all kinds of great things. But you know, it's not just about technology. In fact, Salim Ismail made the point that he uses the laws of thermodynamics to show that as pressure keeps building, ultimately things explode. One of his solutions was that if we can reduce the pressure by having people leave the planet Earth and go somewhere else. I think there are some other solutions, and one of them is to build on the history we have in creating smart and intelligent communities. I started in the computer industry and telecommunications industry 50 years ago. Has anybody here ever gone back 50 years and every year and a half doubled anything? Got any idea what the number would be today? Just following Moore's law, right? Doubles every 18 months. Well, the number is 50 billion today. And that's why we have today products that have, like the iPad, that have just had 25 billion downloads in the last couple of years. And it's why we are today. But my point is, if you keep doing that, keep doubling something, we got to 50 billion today, where do you think the number is in 15 years from now? Just 15 years. Well, the fast answer is the number is 50 trillion. And the reason is we're on an exponential curve. Now, you've seen probably 20 exponential curves in about the last 5 hours here today, put in different contexts. But the point is, while we've got great technologies, the question is, what are we going to do with it? How do we organize our communities, and how do we move forward? Now, the good news is we have 20 years of experience creating smarter, intelligent communities. The confusing thing is we have a different name for them all. You've heard of living cities, sustainable cities, smart cities, intelligent communities, and so on. I'm going to focus a little bit on this issue of creating tomorrow's future city, building on the experience we actually have for the last 20 years. So the idea of smart cities or intelligent communities started in the early 90s. There was Smart Valley in Silicon Valley. Singapore had Intelligent Island. There were a couple of initiatives in Europe. And I was one of the founders of something called Smart Toronto in Toronto, only to be told by a mayor outside Toronto that I probably didn't know the word oxymoron because Toronto is not a smart city. But it has come along anyway over that period of time. And the point is, there is one organization in the world that has been monitoring smarter, intelligent communities for the last 12 years. And in fact, selecting the Intelligent Community of the Year for the last 12 years. And that's the Intelligent Community Forum in New York. It's a think tank that every year gets 400 applications from cities and towns around the world. And so how is this judged? And what are the elements of an intelligent community or a smart city? There are 3 broad criteria: economic, social, and environmental, often driven by innovation. So think of 3 circles, a Venn diagram with innovation in the middle. And so the social component is tremendously important I'm a member of the jury of the Intelligent Community Forum, and that's how we judge the Intelligent Community of the Year. Stockholm has won it. Taipei in Taiwan has won it. Small communities have won it. Every year, the Intelligent Community Forum narrows down the 400 applications to the final 7. This year, 3 of the 7 are in Canada. We like to say Canada punches above its weight in this area because we've done quite well. I'm from Toronto. But notwithstanding that, the winners have been from all over the world. So there's these 3 broad issues. So how do you create an intelligent or community or a smart city? Smart city is a word that's used a lot in Russia. Russia's got an advantage, of course, because you've got a tremendous technological and scientific history and culture. People in Russia are not afraid of technology. And just look today at the tremendous opportunities and applications and uses. So people are not afraid of that. But on the other hand, we have to remember it's about the application and how do you create this smart city. So that's the idea. We create the smart city. The cities that are in the finals right now are from 36,000 people to 2.5 million people. The winner will be announced shortly. I'm also with Ernst & Young here. I'm the chairman of iCanada in Canada. And Ernst & Young has just announced the creation in Moscow of the Center for Smart City Innovation. And the idea is to have relationships with key research organizations around the world and key other organizations interested in this and make a kind of a think tank and thought leadership center that can work with the other initiatives in Russia but provide this global interchange. So the focus will be on economic benefits, obviously employment growth as well, incoming investment, social issues, how do we do that, and environmental issues. So those are the 3 broad areas, and we can talk about those a little more. But leadership is important. It doesn't happen. It's not a technology-driven thing. It happens from leadership at the top. The mayors, the governments have to be involved. Stefan made that point about leadership. And all across Canada, iCanada now has 30 cities all working to be intelligent communities of the year in the future. And one of our ideas is we can use some of those ideas and others, but build on Russia's great history and culture and technology. So that's a brief overview. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. It's very important really to have the wide international cooperation to change something in our cities. Eric, please.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. We're architects and urban planners essentially working in Hong Kong but looking at China. And what we're looking at together with my partner Marissa Yu is this idea that 1 billion people in China will soon be living in cities by 2025. And really that's an urban migration that's the greatest in the world that has ever happened. And so this is really an unprecedented scale. 350 million people will be basically moving to cities by 2025, which is obviously larger than the population of the US that has to be built in a 20-year span. A lot of these cities are being built from scratch. And so there's tremendous opportunity to implement technology that you couldn't do as easily in a city like New York or London. And there's able to build in this technology into the buildings, the new buildings that are being built. There's 5 million buildings that will be built in a 20-year span. And so you could really put it into the infrastructure of the building from the beginning, instead of waiting and actually overlaying it afterwards. So some of the ideas that we're thinking of together and looking at across the globe with people, say, at Columbia University, there's a group called The Living, and they're looking at buildings and the facades, say, of a building, so that the buildings can start to talk to one another, so that if a building needs more air, and it's not getting enough air because it's behind a few layers of buildings, the facade could subtly shift in a very small way to actually allow and bring air back into the city as well, to make it breathable and reduce the wind being blocked by the neighbors. There's also systems in place which we could bring more sunlight into the city. In a place that's very dark, you could actually shift the facade at the very top level and either bring the wind down into the city streets or bring the sunlight into the city streets. And of course, when it's colder, you'd actually want to deflect the wind and bring in more sunlight. So you might actually do opposite effects with the facade of the building as well. But what we've also been looking at is really this social impact and potentially the communication behind it. So So there's been projects that we've been doing, such as a Biennale project, to help visualize these changes that we'd like to see, to really bring it back into the city and invite people in at a city scale. So we've been finding these urban voids, places in the city that not much is happening at the moment, and inviting and holding much larger forums there to actually put into practice some of these ideas as well. One technology I just want to perhaps conclude with is a technology that the engineering firm Arup is working with, and it's a algae facade. So instead of using photovoltaics, which actually are very dark and actually bring the reflective light into the city down, the algae facade is actually vivid green, and so you could actually use it almost as a building material, and it serves as biomass, and so you could use that as a fuel to power the building and actually give back to the city's grids as well. But as an architect, it's actually much more intriguing because it allows us more materials to use, and I think we need a wider palette of materials that we find in our cities so that there's more choice and therefore more diversity. At the moment in China, you see entire cities going up, but they're all built almost out of solid concrete. And so it's providing a sense of the city that's lacking the diversity. And what we want to do is bring in a much wider range of that diversity and let the sustainability and the technology really speak to people and use it as more as a public forum.
Thank you, Eric. And our last speaker, Sergei Kapkov, he is chief of Moscow Department of Culture, and for a short period of time, he did a lot in Moscow, and maybe share with us your opinion about the changes in governance and in the community policy in Moscow. Please.
Спасибо за такое представление.
Thank you for this introduction. Actually, I would like to call your attention to the fact that all things that we are speaking about modernization, about information technology, if we consider them in terms of the city, who will pay for it? That is the main question. In one case, I think that the city should pay for this and from its budget. In other case, the business community should pay for this because the technologies develop the business community. I would like to explain what we see in our brief experiments. Our first experiment of the last year, when in the public space we introduced the internet, we had no practice like that. When in public space in the park of Gorky Park, we had a free opportunity of using Wi-Fi zone. We saw the public change. Quite a number of people, a larger number of people would come with iPads and netbooks and notebooks, and we now this year open 100 such public spaces, and criminal situation in these public spaces changes. Those people who would bring into these spaces bottles of beer, these people, these are different people. They come here only to work quietly. What is the city interested in? The city is interested in that to date, and any city, not only Moscow, Moscow is in competition with other cities. We are interested in the in increasing professionals, people who pay taxes and who create added value. We're interested in an increasing number of these people, so that that change could the city can change only via people. We need an order more of such people. Now in our city we have 600 to 800,000 people like that. In addition to technologies, we need a better life, better salary, higher salaries, and so on. Also,
любые политики, чем любое.
The technologies change the city to a greater extent than any proclamations, any declarations, and we when we change things in the city, all the technologies. Moscow is one of the most advanced cities in terms of the development of the internet and in terms of interaction of the people and urban administration. And the citizens will see a great future. And we establish communication centers where we invite aged people to take, so that they should take part in the electronic government of Moscow. So that that would be get in touch with the Moscow administration. Moscow will need a couple of years in order to that all its programs, including the interaction with the people, including the document turnover, would be developed into a single system. I think that it can be seen when in all the portals of the magistrate we saw the data. We see much greater responses via the internet compared with responses to letters. It changes the cities. In previous years, we actually in online we respond very quickly. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Sergei. Now we have more than 6 minutes for questions. Please, if you have questions, yeah, please say your name and ask. This question for everybody, okay? Huh? Bill?
Well, there's a wide range, and I think certainly my experience around the world is there's all kinds of different energy sources that are being invested. It depends on the climate. I'm from Canada and Russia. We know about our winters, so that's a little different. If you're near a big lake, as Toronto is, we do a lot of deep water cooling. Lake Ontario, bring the water up and use it to cool buildings, so it reduces air conditioning costs. So just all kinds of them, and depends on the area and that sort of thing.
And just to add to that, I mean, we are basically at Siemens, we are active in all parts of the renewable value chain. I mean, we are in solar thermal, we are in wind, we are in tidal, etc. We've seen tremendous economies of scales over the last 10 years or so. So increasingly those technologies become more economically viable. When you look at the London cost curve that I showed earlier today, you can see that some of them are still quite expensive now. So they would not yet pay back immediately the investment, but prices are coming down quickly. So we see grid parity arising very, very quickly.
Thank you, please. Have you more questions? I'd like to ask Sergei, can you say some words about your experience to attract the new type of the people, Moscow citizens in new public spaces like Gorky Park or others? What you do except the Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi and so on?
Начну тогда издалека, но городу
the city should have an atmosphere. Most of the European cities, most of the new cities like Shanghai and New York, they have this atmosphere. And our task is that the city, in any case, in any country, is aggressive and is multi-directional, depending where people live. They different vectors. Some people dream of moving to the downtown, others dream of moving to Europe. We try to create public spaces, no matter where people live, so that they should acquire consciousness that is their city. So they bring people to come to love their city for the atmosphere, for the Red October, for the Gorky Park, for the boulevards. According to our statistics, on the average, the Muscovite spends on the road from home to office about 2 hours, which is a great number, and it is a very difficult situation for the city. Why am I present as the head of the Department of Culture? The culture is a marker. People visit theaters and museums to a less extent because they have no time, because they go to the office and get back home and they watch the TV and go to sleep.
Very important for me that Eric told about the convergence between urbanism, architecture and design, and maybe you can say some words, Bill or Stefan, about the convergence between technologies in the city. Maybe you have some examples of them, of that.
The convergence of technologies. Well, you know, what's really interesting is we've heard a lot about technologies, and one of the areas that tends to get left out because politically it's difficult in some countries is the issue of ultra-broadband communications. And, you know, a lot of cities are putting in Wi-Fi and free Wi-Fi and everything else, but if you want to drive these initiatives with new jobs, new digital media companies, new small companies, people can move anywhere around the world to the best place. And a lot of organizations and cities forget that they should be competitive with ultra broadband. Singapore is putting in 1 gigabit per second into every home. That's what we're doing in waterfront Toronto. In Asia, boy, you better be up to at least 100 megabits per second or you're losing out. It's a tough issue because you're dealing with a lot of incumbent phone companies as well that don't want to invest too quickly, and unless there's a lot of competition. And so this is a very serious issue because the better the bandwidth, the more you will collaborate. And that gets to some social opportunities. So it's an issue that sometimes we forget, or sometimes we avoid because it seems very difficult. But when it comes to small, new, or digital media companies that need a lot of bandwidth, they're going to decide where to go. So if your plans don't include being one of the world's best communications infrastructures, then you're missing a lot, and the brand you're trying to create will not get the maximum effect. So that's a very important point.
As architects, we've always been interested in communication with the wider public, and again, coming back to the internet as an idea, that we really found it important that we could have much more wider range of people giving feedback to the city. We started a website that allowed for more cultural dialogue. So as the city was talking about plans and implementation for spending billions of dollars, we are actually having a site that allowed feedback from the citizens. But a lot of the citizens weren't just normal citizens. There were people like engineers who were talking about the plans in a way that gave more freedom and openness to be able to discuss things in an online forum as well. So we were trying to also use the internet and also really broadband communication to allow for a lot more dialogue within a city and give a lot more feedback as well.
Another interesting example of convergence of technologies I see in particular in the field or in the connection between e-mobility and smart grids. I mean, I touched upon it earlier. Our power grids will need to become more intelligent. We need to understand better who's consuming energy at what time, so we can understand the price peaks and we can flatten them out more easily. Incentivize people to use energy, for instance, do simple things like washing the dishes at night when energy is cheaper, so we get less peaks. And peaks will actually become more extreme the more renewable energy we have in the grid, because it's very obvious the sun's not shining all the time and the wind's not blowing all the time, so we will have times where we will have way too much energy in the grids, and there's times where we will have a lack of energy. So that means we will need to find ways, A, to steer and manage our consumption patterns more intelligently, and on the other hand, also to store energy at times when it is available in abundance and use it later. And here we get the tie to e-mobility, because one of the major means to do that will be e-cars. Every individual who will be driving a car will be able to store energy, as most of the cars in city only drive for less than an hour a day, and most of the time they're just standing there. And they can store energy, and people will online see what the price patterns are in the grid and be able to sell the energy that they've stored back into the grid. So everybody will become both a consumer and a trader of energy, and also, through having a photovoltaic panel on his roof deck or a heat pump in his house, a producer of energy that he can sell into the grid. So, I mean, the potential is huge, and it's all driven by smarter IT and smarter technologies and the availability of data.
Thank you very much. I hope to continue our discussion about the future of the cities and about the technologies in the cities in our Open Innovation Forum in the end of October. And I think that we only start these discussions. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. See you soon.